Hi, everyone. I'm Oracle Oriah, and I am here with Stephen Mehler. He is a phenomenal chematologist. He and Hakim, who is one of the original founders of chematology from Egypt, has got together with him and created this beautiful work of information, this alternative to Egyptology that we've been studying and learning. This is our third session. We're talking about the history of religion. And in the first two sessions, we talked about Stephen's history and how he met Hakim. If you want to go back, and you can watch those two before you watch this one to follow along. And we also are talking about patriarchy and matriarchy and how it affects our world today. He is the author of Land of Osiris, and he's also the author, his second book, From Light into Darkness, The Evolution of Religion in Ancient Egypt. Welcome, Stephen. I'm so glad you're back.
Well, we're starting again. We glitched. We don't know what was lost. So
it was a great cataclysmic event. Okay.
Right, the beginning of my second book.
Yes.
We talk about what's called the Vela supernova. Occurred between 14,000 and 11,000 years ago. A great book, Cataclysm 9500 BC. Allen and Delaire, two British authors. Barbara Hand Clow published this book and then wrote her own book, Catastrophobia, in 2001. She then since updated, and this is the book people can get, Awakening the Planetary Mind in 2010. I wrote a review of it. What we're talking about is an event that changed our whole entire solar system, impacted our Earth, brought 4 seasons when there were 2 seasons, knocked our planet on its side, 23.5-degree tilt, brings a precession of the equinoxes. So we're talking about the early shamans. Shamanism existed up maybe as much as 50,000 years ago, doing what they call sympathetic magic, dressing in animal skins of the animals they would hunt to connect with them psychically, not just physically, psychically, and make a bond that way. And we know that's a fact of indigenous peoples. Before they go out and hunt, they pray to the spirit, the buffalo or the deer, whatever, and they ask.
One could say that's the first awakening, when they became aware of their surroundings.
Well, we already were awake. That's the point. We're in the highest state of consciousness. The cataclysm shakes us up in this high state, and senses start to wane, so we start to fall from grace. That is the fall from grace. We start to lose the senses. So these early shamans are doing these exercises to keep high. Breathing exercises became yoga. Plant helpers became the use of psychedelics. Through the use of psychedelics, they would see visions, of course. We can see visions without them, but when you take psychedelics, I did just about everything, as I was mentioning, except DMT, which I didn't do, but the greatest master of DMT people can read was Dennis McKenna.
Yes.
Great.
I read half of that book. It was
good. Great soul. We lost a great teacher and a great soul when we lost him.
I related to a lot of what he said.
I did everything except shooting heroin in the Air Force. I saw people actually shoot up heroin, become junkies so they would get out of the service.
Wow.
But I always had a fear of needles. I hate needles, so I never went that way. However, though, I did smoke opium. And I know what happens when you do heroin and opium. You feel no pain. You feel no pain. You feel nothing. And you dream in Technicolor.
But also back this up with what can go wrong, so nobody goes and tries it at home.
Oh, no. Well, as I said, I chose the best guide to do acid the first time, myself. But I would always recommend, if somebody's going to do psychedelics, you do it with a teacher, with a learned shaman. Like if you guys have done ayahuasca ceremonies in Peru, usually you have to be with a trained shaman, a trained person who's going to know what's going to happen. I haven't done that. I don't like to go through the throwing up thing, which is peyote also, but I did mescaline, which was pure, without the throwing up of the arsenic, which is, and people don't realize, peyote buttons have arsenic in them. Poison, hello? That's why you get sick, and that's why you throw up. People go, I've seen ayahuasca ceremonies where people throw up for hours, and I'm not interested. I've done my share of psychedelics.
I just do psilocybin.
Okay.
Clean
but, as we talked about, could this be the origin of the so-called ETs, animal-human combinations? We see tremendous visions, tremendous when they happen, and that became the mythology. They would tell the stories of these beings that they would see, and again, they would be going to different dimensions. These creatures exist in different dimensions. As I said to you, there is a template in existence for everything we can imagine. Every creature that existed and has gone extinct, every creature that will yet to come to evolve, and things that we never have seen or never met, but they're there. So we can access that. Now, again, do not deny that these could be physical beings that have come to visit. We do, part of the indigenous tradition of the Commission of Wisdom Keepers, as that we are visitors here from different planetary, different star systems. Okay. So now we're going to move through a period of time where they're starting to come back, starting to build again. Agriculture is being formed, cities are being formed. So now we're going to form now two key stories that Hakim gives us. Like any great teacher, he would always present great teachings in a story. Like Jesus, of course, that you can understand. Okay, one first story. Now we're having food, it's being grown. We're settling down, but we're still tribal. 42 tribes made up the civilization. So these shamans, the early shamans, they would go to what Hakim would call, not the farmers, they weren't called farmers, but he called them the food-producing people. And they'd go to say, well, you guys, you women, you produce more food for your tribe than you need, right? Yeah, sure. You have a lot of extra food, right? Yes, we do. Tell you what, have you ever thought about what happens to this when we drop it? Again, there was no word in their language for death. They had no concept of death. As Hakim would say, like the Tibetans do today. Actually, they may not still do it, but it was a practice. When someone dies, they break the bones of the body. Break the bones. And they put it on a scaffold out in the open for the vultures.
Or what about the rainbow bodies?
The body's not important.
When they disintegrate into powder.
Right. Well, the body was not important to ancient peoples. They, again, no life and death, not a dichotomy. No, all life, death, just a change in phase. But they started to think about this. So the shaman says, do you ever wonder what? No, we never cared about it before. We'll tell you what. We'll take care of it. We'll preserve it. We'll protect it. We'll do prayers for it. We'll make sure that you can come back to it. Don't you like this body you have? Well, yeah, it's comfortable. I'm used to it. We'll make it so you can come back to it. Mummification. It was a distortion. So they said,
what year was this? Do you remember?
Oh, this is early thousands, 6,000, 8,000, 9,000 BC, okay?
Wow, okay.
And they say to them, you give us half the harvest to us each year, and we'll do this. Okay, next story. As we said, people had the senses. We were all in the age of Aten, all using 360 senses. We knew where the energy centers were. We could feel energy. People still can feel energy. It's what people call today force sensitives, people that feel energy and can determine energy. Some people are more sensitive than others, as you know. Well, they would go to spots where they knew, again, running underground water, igneous rock, and a source of crystal produces natural electromagnetic fields. Those are the power places on our planet. They would go, okay. So these shamans, one day, they took 2 extraterrestrial stones. Extraterrestrial means they were meteorites. They had fallen down, full of quartz crystal, full of energy. And they placed them together like 2 eggs like this over a stream of running water.
Wow.
And people would come to energize themselves. So later on, these shamans came along and they drew a line in front of the stones saying, only we can go behind this line. Only we can talk to the gods, the principles. They weren't called gods yet. They were they were creating the system of netters. They were calling them aspects of creation, forces, principles, but only we.
That was the beginning.
You have to stand in line. And so Papa would say, people would gladly stand in line and they would confidently give a piece of bread, a piece of gold medal, a piece of whatever was,
my gosh,
whatever was in fashion, those, because it was barter system. There was no money, but it was exchange of goods and services.
So that's where the temple mentality.
They created their profession around death. The idea that only we can communicate. So listen what happens. Listen to how he beautifully creates this. And if there's any anthropology, archaeology students, they should listen closely. They draw the line. People stand in a line. Then they put a wall, a pylon, a gate, the first gate. Then people can't come behind the gate. Then they build columns. They build what's called hypostyle hall. The greatest example of that is Karnak, The greatest temple of the ancient world has 65 monstrous columns. And that's what I think you were talking about.
That's what I was talking about.
I know that. That's
never
Karnak.
felt such a strong vortex as I felt there.
There's
I
many
thought I was
holy.
going to lift out of my body.
Karnak has many of holy holies because it was many different time periods.
And that's the temple he channeled.
Right. That's one a great temple. It's a temple to Mut, to the mother goddess, not to Amun, which is wrong in Egyptology. Egyptology says that temple is dedicated to Amun. Wrong. The temple was dedicated to Mut, the feminine
that was the
principle.
one that I felt, and it's funny, I'm a mother, but I felt the closest. I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to leave. I just wanted to stay there.
And Sekhmet is there. You went to Sekhmet, right?
Yeah.
Sekhmet is there at Karnak. So
yeah.
Sekhmet's just another aspect of Mut. Okay. So then they would start to build these columns, and then they would build a second gate, a second pylon, and people had to stand outside of that. So no longer even going into the Holy Holies anymore. Then they built the walls around.
I could barely hear this. This is cringy because this is when separatism started. This is
exactly,
when
girl. This is on its way to
church and money and
religion. Once it's religion, it's us and them, life and death. You're gonna die. We got to take care of your body. There's where it comes in. Then we move into patriarchy. Continue. Listen, we're not done. You have to listen to this key. The walls are built outside. Then people only stand outside the walls. Don't even go into the temple except on certain feast days. They're allowed into the temple.
No.
And here's the thing. Temple is based on a Greek word, temelos. It means enclosure. There was the first temple.
Yep.
And there the first priest. The shamans then called what Hakim labeled the Hanut. The Hanutian plural. Translated as funerary priests. They then take the bodies, mummify the bodies, and they're going to protect them. At first, they put it in the ground. Doesn't work. The jackal is the eater of the dead in Africa. He would dig up the body.
Right.
Said, oh, no, we can't have that. So they put a slab of granite over the body. It's called today mastaba in Egyptian, means bench. Then Egyptology wants to tell you the mastaba evolved into pyramids. Wrong. Thanks for playing. The mastaba evolved into the tomb, underground, not the pyramid. So now we have the first day. We have a creation of a profession, the Hanuti funerary priests. Where they first appear is some of the oldest texts, which are known as the pyramid texts. And if you went to Saqqara, you might have gone into the pyramid, who they said is called Unas. It's not Unas, it's Wenis, where the pyramid texts are on the wall. And there the Hanuti are mentioned for the first time. And they're telling what's going to happen. Oh, the king's going to join with Osiris. It's going to be wonderful. He's going to have this great journey because you're giving us. So then you had to pay. So in other words, this first profession was the one that had to be supported by everybody else. Particularly, of course, royalty, the wealthy classes. They're the ones that are going to be mummified. Common people were buried in shallow graves. Very few were ever.
So now we start with the hierarchy.
There you got a hierarchy. There, and now it comes in that the netters are now defined. Remember I told you the first definition of Ra was the ram?
Yes.
Because it's a stubborn animal? Well, now you have another tribe of people coming to Egypt. They're called the Falcon tribe. They're mistakenly called in Egyptology the Shemsu Hor, the followers of Horus. Shemsu is not the correct word. Hakim agreed, and I agreed, that the term would have been Seshu Hor, the people of Horus. Hor. And what's their symbol? The falcon. The falcon is a symbol of their tribe. So therefore, they come in and they replace Ra, take the ram away, and give the Ra, because it's the age of Ra that this is happening a long time ago, and that's the cycle. And so Ra is the symbol, uses the falcon. So that's the bird people. Okay, well, you see the head of the falcon, human body, but it's Ra. It's a nectar representing Ra as the symbol of the sun.
And what's the misinterpretation that most people think about Ra in Egypt?
That's the sun god. It is the god, the sun god.
Okay.
So 1/5 of the understanding. It's Heper, Ra, Un, Aten.
Got it.
Five stages of the sun. And now we're going to talk how that evolves. So there is the beginnings of religion. Okay? The nectars are the principles. So when The guide told you, not incorrectly, each gnome then would choose a netter. So that would be their principal netter. That's my netter. This is Hermopolis, which the Greek called Hermopolis, is called Jehuti, took Jehut, Toth as their netter. So they did, in a way, compete. They tried to see who had the biggest temple, but it was still just a uniform. It's not until around 2000 BCE. Now, we said that these cycles are within cycles, and I mentioned when they created astrology, and we say astrology was created in Kemet, not by the Greeks. The Greeks picked the zodiac and everything up from the animals. You can see that in the zodiac at Dendara, which is in the Louvre, the original, stolen by the French in 1798. Napoleon and his people was in the basement of the Louvre. Shows astrology. But Schwaller de Lubitz said what that shows is that that's an older system. Goes back to 8000 BCE, because Cancer was the main sign when it was discovered. That's 8000 BCE.
Wow.
So, but see how the cycles correspond to the astrological signs, the netters that are chosen. When the system becomes united, when we say this woman of the north, black African woman with the title Nithotep, meets a man of the south who was known as the Scorpion King, King Scorpion, and she chooses him to be her lover, consort, no husband. It was not a war, it was not a battle, it was a union. Well, that happens during the age of Taurus. Taurus is fixed earth, everything united. Taurus is also the symbol of the bull. All through the early dynasties, the major symbol is the bull.
You know I'm a Taurus, right?
No, I didn't. Now I do. I know your husband's Leo, but I didn't know you were Taurus.
Right.
Both fixed signs. You guys could, well, we'll talk about that offline. You guys could have some clarity. Both fixed signs. I'm Aquarius rising. That's a fixed too, but I'm sad. Okay. So now we see. Now we move in around 2000 BCE. The sign changes. And the ram becomes dominant. The age of Aries. What is Aries? The god of war. Patriarchy. Systemized warfare. And what happens then? They choose the fifth stage of the sun because the stage we're going into is the age of Amun.
Right.
So Amun then takes the ram of Ra, and becomes sacred to Amun. And the ram is the symbol. And here you have the influence of patriarchy coming into Kemet, even though it stays matriarchy to the end. Amun then is said to be the king. Whoa, that was something. The king.
I have things going on. Don't worry.
Okay, the king of the netters. So now Amun is placed more important than all the other netters. All the other netters then become an aspect of Amun. This is your first patriarchal god. This is where patriarchal
This is where the first male
deity
godhead figure
becomes important. So that all the other then you get Amun Ra. They choose Ra to join with him, and it's Amun Ra. You get what's called the Ithich-phallic god, the god with the ever-present erection, which is Min. We'll talk about sexuality. Min, M-I-N, and it's also he adopts and becomes Amun Min. So he's taking everybody else. He's
so
taking
people
over
don't
everything.
realize on your first lecture with us, you talked about the matriarchy started on the planet first.
Right.
And in this talk, you're talking about what happened after the cataclysmic event, when it rebirthed into a new era. And this is when we went into the second.
A couple thousand years of what we call the blank. From when this event probably cleared, say 11,000 years ago, 9,000. That's why they labeled their book 9500, Cataclysm 9500 BCE. That'd be 11,500 years ago. That's when they saw it happen. So there was a couple of thousand years of transition coming out of matriarchy, coming out of the age of Aten, where we were high, where we're sliding, we're degenerating. Here's where the shamans come in, become the Hanuti. They take over. So again, we say from the beginning to the end, ancient Kemet was a theocracy, not a monarchy. Hakim would say not only were they not male pharaohs, but even the supposed kings of the fourth dynasty, he would say, were not even kings. They were the Horus, the male that the female is chosen. She is the Per'ah. They are the figure that the priests put on the wall because it's patriarchy. They're flattering the male. The male is the one who can support them in their lifestyle, so the clergy becomes fat.
So when the Grecians came over to visit these temples and saw these ancient these figures, they couldn't process that this was a matriarchy since they were in patriarchy, right?
Or that it was a monotheism. They saw only polytheism like they had. So all their God,
their interpretation
and if you notice, if you study Greek religion and Roman religion, their gods are very anthropomorphic. They get jealous, they have sex, they get angry, they kill each other, they fight wars, they commit suicide, whatever. They're very human, not the Netters, of course. In Kemet, they were cosmic principles, high principles. The Greeks and the Romans bring them down to earth and make them human gods. But even then, Amun is then considered to have human qualities too. And he was first considered the hidden, right? There's no image of Amun, supposedly. Then they adopt the ram. Then even further, when we move into what's known as the New Kingdom period, 1500 BCE, Amun is depicted as a man, sitting on a throne with a particular headdress, which Hakim said were heron feathers. The heron became a bird that was also...
During this era, do you think they ever saw any of these leaders as hermaphrodites, or just, you know, they're not, how would you say it? Like,
we're getting
genderless. They're hermaphrodites.
We're getting there.
Oh, we're getting there.
There's one in particular that
really
we're heading towards. No, what they were told was the male head, Horus, is their representative, the Hanuti of the Netters. So this is where you get the idea, son of the sun, that the pharaoh was worshipped as a god. No, they weren't. They weren't considered to be Netters. They were representative of the Netters. So yes, the priest would say, the person we have put on the throne, not yet king, we're not using the word king, the male consort is special.
So the word netter is only used in Kemet or Egyptian mythology?
Correct. Chematology. It's not used in Egypt.
Is that because I've never heard of this word netter in like Christianity or like the Bible and all that?
No. Again, the one who brought this out, we're coming to it, was R.A. Schwaller-Delovich, who was a Hermeticist. He wasn't French. I said was wrong. He was Alsatian. He was from Alsace. He would have been pissed off if I said he was French. Okay. Alsace-Lorraine, they considered themselves not Germany, not Fleming, not Belgium, but not France either. They were different.
Get it right. Okay.
Right. But he was the one studying the Temple of Luxor in the 30s, measuring it, realized it had 3 axes. You read his books. Again, difficult to read. They're translated into English. The Temple and Man. But he was the one that said Neter was not god or goddess. The first scholar of the 20th century to say that. And he wrote his major book in the 50s. John Anthony West picked him up, became the major proponent of Schwaller's work. He was the first to say the Neters were not deity. They were an aspect of the whole, a principle. And Hakim took it further and said it's a sense that they represented senses that were innately born with 360 senses. We label 180
These are very
feminine.
enlightened beings. The Netters.
They're not beings. Again,
they're not beings.
No, see, this is a mistake. Even alternative people, when they go to see Sekhmet, one of the appellations they have for Sekhmet is the all-powerful one. That is not correct. One means she's whole and complete into herself. Sekhmet literally means the power, period. No one, no anything else. No feminine, no masculine. The power. What did they consider the power? To the Cometians, the unconditional love of mother, the greatest force in the universe. Nothing can surpass it. To them, the greatest force in the universe is the unconditional love of mother. So the mother netters, of course, were the most important. So not beings. They were not looked on as beings.
Got it.
Those in the ancient astronaut school, ancient aliens, want to say they were beings. Again,
right.
I brought Hakim to a conference in 1998 in Laughlin, Nevada. It was put on by the International UFO Congress. But in the summertime, they put on what they called summer seminars, where they would bring people in to discuss all different subjects. They invited me. I talked to them about my teacher. They invited Hakim. He came to there. I spoke first after him. So he would answer questions because he was uncomfortable speaking in front of an audience. He was out of his element. Put him in the field in front of an artifact, go for hours. Sit around the shisha pipe in his house, go for hours. but on a stage in front of 500 people,
Oh yeah.
he was a letter. But a woman came up. Again, he would always talk to a person according to the level which you were at. He would love to spoken to you and Riz, of course. So a woman come up to answer, was Osiris a myth or an extraterrestrial? He's in front of an audience of ET freaks, right?
Oh God.
He paused, long pregnant pause, and he said, a myth. Now, why would he say that? Knowing that it is tradition, it's possible that Osiris did come to Earth in physical form and was an ET. Why did he say that?
Right.
Because he did not like the way the audience and the subject was approaching the subject, again, the physical nuts and bolts, and nothing spiritual, nothing. So he'd rather just say,
He
no,
shut down.
it's a myth. Don't go there.
Wow.
So
He's
here we
cool.
go. Now we're in the new kingdom now. We've moved through we've gone through the old kingdom to the middle kingdom. Amun comes in around the end of the middle kingdom. Again, 2000 BC, 1800 BC. We move into the age of Aries. We move into the age of Amun at the same time. Amun becomes the king of the net. Okay. For now, these Hanuti, who are being fed and taken care of by everybody else, get fat and powerful and corrupt. So, around 1350 BCE, the king at that time was named Amenhotep III. Again, Hakim used to make fun of this. Amenhotep. Again, Amun then becomes the name, the titles that they use again. Amun, the age of Amun. It means Hotep is an interesting word. It has many different definitions, many different translations. It means pleased, satisfied, fulfilled, or sacrifice. A Hotep was also an altar of sacrifice, which is Abu Jaral. Okay. So Amenhotep means the one who sacrifices to Amun. They say Amun is satisfied, Amun is complete, Amun is fulfilled. Yeah, but literally it's mean the one who sacrifices to Amun. Okay. So Hakim would say, do you think, this is all the Greeks in Egyptology that put these numbers on him. He thinks that when the child was born, the mother would have a stamp, and she'd say, okay, you're number 1, you're number 2. There was no 1, 2, 3, 4. There's at least 12 Ramses. I mean, I think it goes to Ramses 14, actually. Anyway, there were 7 Cleopatras. So no, they just used the title Amenhotep. They didn't go 1, 2, 3, 4. But anyway, in history, going by their chronology, this man Amenhotep III and his wife Tayi, we talk a lot about her, had a child. The child, they gave him the name Tutmosis V. He died young. They had another son. They called him Amenhotep. He would be called Amenhotep IV. Here's my man. Around the age of 6 or 8, his mother, Tayi, we're going to talk much more about her, sends him off to learn from a master. A great master, also had the title Amenhotep. But he was given the title Amenhotep, son of Hapi. Hapi is the Nile. Hapi is depicted as a hermaphrodite, both male and female. The water, the Nile, both male and female. He was a great master. I have photographs of him. Statues of him exist in the Cairo Museum. It looks like he was Tibetan. He was definitely Asian. He teaches. Also his mother, Tayi, was a great teacher, bringing the tradition where she came from, because she was not native-born Commission. She comes from a tribe, an area which was called Mitanni, which is today northern Syria, which was Semitic. So she brings in a Semitic tradition. So this child, around the age of 7 or 8, says, I'm not using this title Amenhotep anymore. I'm changing my name, my title, to Ach En Aten. Ach, A-K-H. Another interesting word, has many translations. It means child. Some people son of, daughter of, child of. But as Hakim would say, it meant the shadow. Like the child is the shadow of the mama. Again, like we're repeating, we said this before. He would say, mama can't get rid of her shadow. It always follows her everywhere we go. Again, ducks are the classic because they imprint on their mother and follow her everywhere. So the shadow or shade of the mama. So he was saying, I am the shadow or the shade of Aten, which is the wiser, which was the cycle before the cycle I'm in now, Amen. The cycle when we were all enlightened, all using all the senses. So he then comes to co-rule with his father, gains a certain degree of power, and his priests join him, and they go on a rampage. Now, again, Egyptology incorrectly attributes this to him. No, it was his zealous priests. They go throughout Egypt and they start hacking out the images of Amen. They act out the title in there. He's saying, we want to return to what we would call today the old-time religion, to the old days. He said, the priests have come corrupt. People are worshiping the priests and not the netter. People, corrupt. I don't want none of this. We're not going to have any of that. The rituals, traditions, they're gone. Everyone can have an access to the divine. We don't need these intermediaries. And to do that, he says, we're going to change the system. In the normal system of temples, you'd go in the pylon, the gates, to put storehole, to go into the Holy of Holies, which is the inner chamber, which would be a solid gold statue of the netter, and it'd be in darkness because it's Amen. Everything's in darkness, and that's where you pray, and that's where the priests would go and say they talk to the netter, and they'd come out and tell the people what the netter said, blah, blah, blah. No, we're doing away with that, he said. We're taking the roofs off the temples. They're going to be open to the air, open to the sunlight. Everything is to be exposed in sunlight, and everyone can have an access to the divine. But the people were not in this state of consciousness as he was. They worshipped him and Nefertiti as deity instead. Oh, the divine's a great master enlightened being.
Right.
And so technically the Egyptologists say his revolution was a failure. He only ruled for 17 years. Now, there's tons of books other people have written. The one that impressed me the most were two in particular. When I was with the Rosicrucians, and this is something that's interesting because this goes back now to 1978. Okay, let's go back to 1968. As we said, I was very big into Freud and to Jung. Jung did a very interesting experiment with Freud one day. He told him, sometimes you will go to your bookshelf, looking to a certain book, but something else will happen and another book will fall into your lap. And Freud said, oh, this is nonsense. He didn't believe in the spiritual. He thought it was all nonsense.
Right.
They went to the bookshelf. There was a loud boom. Somehow something happened. A book fell on the floor. And picked it up, and it was a book that Freud had been looking for years.
No way.
See? So this is what happened. 1968. One of the great metaphysical bookstores in the world, Samuel H. Weiser Bookshop in downtown Manhattan, New York. Looking for anything that'd be interesting, my head fell on this used paperback. I pulled it out. Moses and Monotheism by Sigmund Freud. I never heard of it. I had read Freud. I read his books, his psychoanalytic theories, his dream theories, all of that. I hadn't heard of this one. But wow. As it turns out, and I can go more detail now, this was a book that was published 6 months before Freud died. He'd actually, in the fall, I think the spring of 1939, he fled to London. They finally got him out of Vienna saying the Nazis are coming. You know you're going to be one of the first ones they're going to go after. You got to get out. You got to get out. Finally, they drag him out right before the Gestapo was right on his heels. So he spends out the rest of his life in London. And this book was was first printed 6 months before he died, but it became more popular posthumously after he died. He had written 2 articles for the psychoanalytic journal Imago in the early 30s. Why in the early 30s? Because the Germans, who were the leading archaeologists at the time, had discovered a city in Middle Egypt called Amarna. They found tablets. They had discovered this king, Akhenaten, who was lost to history. Freud became very interested. Like Jung, Carl Jung actually wanted to be an archaeologist when he was young. And what he did, he became an archaeologist of the mind. Became a psychologist. Freud was also interested in archaeology because the Germans were the great archaeologists of the day. So Richard Lipsius, German archaeologist, had founded this city, founded these documents. They translated a lot of these documents. It sounded like stuff from the Old Testament. He goes, wow. So Freud postulated in his first article, what if Moses was an Egyptian priest? He wrote this, blah, 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 blah. Then he wrote the second article, Moses was an Egyptian priest, blah, 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 blah. Third article, 6 months before he died, what if Moses was Egyptian priest, therefore then? Okay. What he postulated was Akhenaten.
Right.
The teachings of Akhenaten,
Say that.
obviously the basis of Mosaic, what we call Mosaic. Now, as I say in my book, I don't go into a whole history of Judaism. That would be in volumes in itself. What I go in is the Kemetic influence on Judaism. And there's no doubt that the religion of Amun became the basis of Judaism. I'll explain. As Freud saw. Now, I just recently reread it. It's very interesting. For many years, I read 1968, read it again in the 70s, then read it again when I wrote my book in 2005, but I hadn't read it since then. I recently went back and reread it again. Well, Freud made a lot of errors because of the knowledge of his day, but his basic thesis is correct, that Moses had been a priest of Akhenaten.
Yep.
And his name was Ramisu or Ramses. Ramos. He was his vizier. He left Egypt with the followers. First thing, when I met Hakim, and we started to talk about this in 92, he said, the Exodus is a real event. Even Judaic scholars think it's mythological. It never really happened. It's just a story to explain the origin of the Jews. And so they explain it this way. No. All myths are based on a real event in space and time. They get changed over the telling. They get, the classic story, again, I'm dating myself. It used to be what we used to do when I was in grade school. There'd be a game called telephone. One person would whisper something to the first kid in the first row. It would go to till you go to the last kid in the last row, and he would relate what is said, and it had nothing to do with what the first kid had said. That happens in the retelling, down so many times. Okay.
And isn't there also political influence of wanting to control?
Absolutely. And the Hanuti themselves will alter the stories according to time.
Right.
So the story is that this king had two viziers, and one of them supposedly buried at Saqqara. His tomb is closed, was found in 1986 by a Frenchman named Alain Zévy. He called him Aper El, A-P-E-R-E-L. I can't say, no. They've mistranslated the title. It's Cheper El. Now we know it's Apre Iya, because we know what the title is. So here's what. Approximately 1350 BC. He ascends. They say ruled for 17 years. Well, another book, again, Freud's first book, Moses and Monotheism, major influence. Another book is written by an expatriate Egyptian named Ahmed Osman, O-S-M-A-N. The first book he wrote in the 70s, he put it out, was called Moses, Pharaoh of Egypt. It was not printed in the United States. No American printing company would print it. It was only printed in Canada and in the UK.
Of course.
Why? Why? Because we can get to anti-Semitism. There's a Jewish cabal. There's Jewish control of the American printing. Right. It was not printed, okay? He reprinted it in the 80s called Moses and Akhenaten. It was printed then by inner traditions. Again, postulating that Moses was Ramisu, priest of Akhenaten. What's considered to be Mosaic Judaism is the teachings of Akhenaten. What were the teachings of Akhenaten? Like I said, he broke tradition. He broke the rules. And up until that point, the Hanuti had been saying the netters were only to the Egyptians. Like Amun, Isis, Horus, Osiris. They were the netters of Egypt, but they didn't concern themselves with the foreigners. Foreigners were considered barbarians. As I've said many times, Greeks came into Egypt. The Comitian priests considered them barbarians. Comitians would not eat off of the same plate that a Greek would use. I'm going to show you all these similarities because that's a part of Judaism today. Okay, what's kosher and what's not kosher.
Right.
Okay. So they considered the Greeks to be barbarians. They had no concept of their own history. In fact, the priests said to Solon, who brought the story of Atlantis to Plato in the Critias and the Pheidias, you Greeks are like children. You have no sense of your history. Meaning you don't know matriarchy. You don't understand where you came from.
Yeah. So they're not honoring source.
Exactly. But these Akhenaten changed the story.
So he wanted everybody to go back to the basics.
To be enlightened, to everybody be full. Everybody can speak. So he said the netters then were for all humans. So how we know the teachings is we have what's called Yamana tablets. There were documents written. His teachings were down. They have been translated, so we know what's said. Badly translated. I retranslate in my book, according to how we would translate one of his hymns and prayers. But what he's saying is Aten, the wiser, is for all people. And for chicks, for rocks, for trees. He was saying everything has consciousness. He was returning to the higher state of understanding. It's not just humans who can relate to the netters. The netters are for everything that exists, creation. So it's all people, all people. It was a universal teaching. And the first person that really picked up it was an American Egyptologist named James Breasted, who wrote in 1901 that Akhenaten seemed to be the first individual in history, because he realizes we're all humans, we're all in the same boat. And that's the teachings. And that's what his teachings, people don't pick up on it. He has very zealous priests, Aten priests, who were before that Amun priests, saying they know exactly how to erase the monuments and erase the documents because they're the ones that put them on in the first place.
Was he considered one of the first revolutionary speakers at the time?
The first, according to some people in history. He's considered the first monotheist, okay? But he did not invent monotheism. He did not invent the Aten. Again, the 5 stages of the sun were in the existence from the earliest dynasties, from dynasty 0. Aten was known. We see in the 3rd dynasty the image of Aten, but it was only considered a stage, one of the 5, just like Amun was. Amun gets raised to the top, so Akhenaten wants to raise Aten to the top, to go back to the old days when we all were enlightened. And of course it fails, because we're in Amun. So his revolution fails. Everybody in Egyptology consider him a failure. Well, here's the point that my book differs. And my book was based on another book written by a Rosicrucian, because we're going to get into Akhenaten is considered the forerunner of Judaism and the Rosicrucian teachings. But let's do Judaism first. See, this is why we may not have time to do all today. But
wow, this is just, and I knew you were going to, and I didn't even have proof, but I just felt it made sense in the natural order that he would be Moses. Of course he would.
He wasn't Moses. Asman thinks he was Moses. Other authors do too. No, Ramisu, his Mizir was Moses. He was the founder of Mosaic Judaism. Yes, his teachings became what Moses brought.
Was Moses.
But he was not the same person.
Not the same.
That's where we say Asman was wrong. That, again, you'll see, if you read From Light into Darkness, it's clearly explained that there were other individuals. Moses is what's called, again, one of Freud's students was a German man named Otto Rank, R-A-N-K. His big thesis was called The Myth of the Great Man, meaning, again, patriarchal. He would look at all the great men in history and say that there were actually more than one living person whose life was fused into the myth of the great man. He used Moses as the example, and Jesus, and Muhammad, which is probably true. The mythology that we come down as Jesus the Christ was probably more than one actual person that was fused into the myth. So the same is with Moses. Ramisu was Akhenaten, was Ramisu, Ramos gets incorporated into the myth. So what happens? So Hakim always said to me when I first met him, the Exodus was the followers of Amun chasing the followers of Akhenaten out of Egypt.
Right.
And my work since 1968, particularly since I met him in 1992, totally verified that statement. So that's what my book is about. The Exodus was an actual historical event.
And why was that significant to you?
Even I had to find out, because I wanted the origins of Judaism. I was looking at my own history then. I believed for it. I believed that there was something else that happened. Judaism wasn't just a revelation where God came and spoke to Abraham, and now all of a sudden you had this new God, new religion, and there was nothing before that. Obviously.
Is the Exodus the same as the 40 days and 40 nights, or is that the?
Yes. No, it's 40 days in the desert. We're going to explain that. Why?
Even though
I explained in my book why it took 40 days. Okay.
You know what's really interesting is I'm not claiming a religion anymore in my life, but when I was a small child listening to that story, I was severely decapitated. No, I was severely just engrossed in this story. I felt like I'd been there. I knew this story. I was emotional. I was a small child. I could barely hear I felt like I'd been there. I've seen this in person.
This story gives identity to the Jewish people. Not only that, it gave a reason for African American slaves, because once they could read the Bible, let me get this out of here, something in the way. Get out of here. Okay, once they could read the Bible, a lot of slaves, particularly Frederick Douglass, and particularly Nat Turner, who led a rebellion, really identified with the Hebrews in the Bible, because they were slaves unto Pharaoh of Egypt, and they cried out to God, and God heard their cries, and God answered their cries and delivered them. Why are all the Negro spirituals based on the Old Testament?
Yes.
Of course. Down Moses, let my people go. Of course, we shall overcome. That's all from the Old Testament. But it was all pure mythology.
Yeah.
But based on an actual historical event. There were no Jews that were slaves in Egypt. Then we come down to the thing I mentioned in my book, 3 terms.
So you're saying there was no slaves, or there were?
No. Jew, Israelite, Hebrew are not the same people. 3 different terms. We'll do it in chronological order. Hebrew, Israelite, and Jew. Hebrew, they say, and Hebrew scholars believe it, it's based on a Comitian word, apiru, or habiru, which they think meant foreigners, outsiders. So that the Hebrews, with the story that we're told, there's a famine that happens around 1800 BCE. Jacob, one of the Hebrew patriarchs, there's a famine in Canaan. And everybody's dying. So the people come to Jacob and say, there's plenty of food in Egypt. Why don't you just go take a group and go into Egypt and we can get back food. Okay, he can't go, but he sends his sons. And he sends one of his favorite sons, Joseph, along with his most favorite son, Benjamin, because they were both sons. You know, he had many wives. Again, the Jewish Hebrew patriarchs were the classic adulterers. I mean, they had, you know, the harem, multiple wives. This didn't exist, of course, in Kemet, but this is where they had multiple wives. So his favorite wife was Rachel, the youngest one. She gave him the 2 youngest sons, Joseph and Benjamin. So they go into Egypt. And there's a famous story that's in the Old Testament. They recognize Joseph's there, and they not recognize him because he had been in Egypt. The story is that Joseph had originally been in Egypt, had been attempted to be seduced by the wife of a prominent Phoenician noble. He refused the woman. She claimed rape. He was thrown in jail. In jail, he's suffering, but he's in jail. He meets 2 other people that were part of the king's court, the winemaker and the steward. And Joseph has the ability to interpret dreams. He's a great interpreter of dreams. So, all of a sudden they're told in the stories in the Old Testament, in Exodus, the king is having bad dreams, the Pharaoh, having terrible dreams. He sees things that are happening and he can't explain it. He brings all the wise men of Egypt, all the prophets, all the priests. They can't interpret. But someone says, look, the winemaker has just gotten out of prison. He serves the king. He brings him his wine glass. He says, I was in the prison with a guy who was really good at interpreting dreams. The king says, bring him here. They get Joseph out of prison. They bring him in front of the king. He tells him the dream. Joseph says, oh, it's simple. You have 7 years where you see there's fat cows and they're eating the grass. Then there's 7 years where the cats are lean and there's no grass and they eat the fat cows. He says, it's easy. There's going to be 7 years of plenty, king, but then it's going to be 7 years of severe drought. So in those 7 years of plenty, store grain, store food, prepare. They do it. The drought comes. They're prepared. He's made vizier. Joseph, this foreigner who slipped into jail because of a charge of adultery, the king makes him second in command because he interprets the dreams. So the famine happens in Canaan. Jacob sends his sons, older sons, with Benjamin, his most beloved. They go to Egypt, and they don't recognize their brother, who greets them as vizier, as the prime minister. They don't recognize him. He says, okay, I'm going to play a little trick on my brothers. So he goes to the sack. They're getting the grains. Their sacks are on their donkeys. And he goes to the sack of Benjamin, his youngest brother, David. Takes the sack and he puts some gold in there. Some gold jewelry for me. So they're going out. So Joseph then sends out an army. Stops them on the way. What's the matter? What's the matter? You people are thieves. What? What are you talking about? Oh, that is food. They open up the sack. There's gold. Ah, Benjamin, his most beloved son. They bring him back. He's going to be executed. He's going to be killed. They're begging themselves, our father is old. Please, again, it's the long story in Exodus.
Oh, I know the story very well.
Right, so Isaac throws off, so Joseph throws off his face, his covering, says, look, I'm your brother. Oh, my God. Fill yourself up with food. Go back, get my father, and bring my family to Egypt.
That story used to make me cry. I still almost want to cry when you tell that story.
So there's at least 60 people that come in through the family. And that 60 grows to 600,000 according to the Bible. It wasn't that many. But that's the Hebrews. But Hakim tells a different story. Hebrew is not based on the word Apir or Hebrew. They were not foreigners. Hebrew is based on the Commission word cheperu, the plural of the scarab beetle, the dawn, the symbol of the beginning of the cycle. So what does Hebrew mean? Those that were there at the beginning. So Hakim taught me, and I have evidence of that in the tomb we went into. The 12 tribes later of Hebrews, who become the 12 tribes of Israel, were part of the 42 tribes of Kemet. They were indigenous Commission people. They were not Semites. They were not foreigners. So the story makes no sense in that respect. But they come in, they're there, and then they're to leave. But who are they? So the Hebrews are not practicing Judaism. There is no Judaism. They're practicing Commission religion. So the Hebrews become part of Akhenaten's lineage, his family. Because as I point out from his father's side, his mother's side, he's descended from Semitic peoples. Semitic peoples who had their own patriarchal gods. But she introduces him to this Asian teacher, Amenhotep, son of Hapi, who brings an Asiatic tradition that there's only one deity, only one priest. And the tradition comes through the Hebrews on his father's side. So Akhenaten was at the same time Commission, Hebrew, and Semite. So his teachings are that Amen is for everyone. We are all the children of God, all. The Amen priests don't like this. They're out of work. I mean, if their fat days are over, they're not privileged anymore. So they plot in secrecy to bring down this system. So what happens is still shrouded. We don't have exactly the proof. But I think it's apparent that Akhenaten is murdered, Nefertiti is murdered, and most all of the children are murdered, except one daughter, because it's still matrilineal. So they think Tut, who comes after, is the son of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. Hakim and I both disagreed. We think maybe from another woman whose name was Kia or Kaya. They have discovered her. They believe now she may be the mother of Tut, but they'll still believe that Akhenaten was Tut's father. I disagree. We'll go into more detail about that. That's speculation now. But what happens is, there's no doubt that the priests revolt against Akhenaten. And I think he's murdered. She's murdered. They take one of the daughters, who's called Ankh-Senahamen. First, she's born with the title Ankh-Aten, Aten in her title, as he is born Tunk-At-Aten, the title he is given at birth. And they create a marriage contract, so she's the Per'ah, gives him legitimacy to rule. They put him on the throne at 9 years old. And Ramisu leads the followers of Akhenaten out of Egypt because they're going to be persecuted. So here is the origin of the Hebrews being persecuted, the Jews being slaves. There were no slaves in Kemet. You understand? Yeah. There were no slaves in Kemet up until Greco-Roman times. And it's the Persians who really start slavery, but the Romans are the ones who really begin slavery.
it wasn't the way that they wanted to live anyway, because they had this matriarchal.
Well, look, here's a classic example. In the Middle Kingdom, they discovered a series of papyruses that saying the workers had gone on strike because they weren't being given enough garlic and onions for food. That was what they were paid. So they went on strike, right? Can you imagine? 1843 in Alabama, the masters come out to the field one day and the slaves are sitting down saying, "No, massa, we ain't going to work today. We're on strike." Tree over there, get out the shotgun, blam, blam, hang them up. Nobody went on strike. So slaves don't go on strike. They were workers. They were paid workers. So
images of that, and it looks so dangerous. Like, how did they even survive that?
But what we have here is the Amun priest persecuting Aten followers. There's the persecution.
Yes.
What came down to the Hebrew story. Persecuted.
That makes more sense.
They leave Egypt with the teachings of Akhenaten, with the Ramisu. They come to the Holy Land. They become. Now, why did it take 40 days? Because these are Egyptian people now. They're commissions. They go out in the desert. And here's the interesting story that continues in Exodus, the Jewish story. It's part of it. They suddenly go astray, and they create the golden calf, and they go back to worshiping the netters of Egypt, and God punishes them, and blah, 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 blah. Well, this is why to explain the story, and why it took 40 years. Because when they went into Canaan, they weren't just exactly greeted as the long-lost, beloved ancestors. They were foreigners. They were Egyptians. They were not greeted with open arms. So they had to form alliances. Alliances were formed in the desert with the Semitic peoples of Canaan who worshipped a volcano god called Yahweh, which becomes Yahweh as you spell it. I'm going to get right into it now. And they have to come with the followers of Rabisu who have Aten as their follower. So why does it take 40 years? And here is the compromise. The most sacred prayer in Judaism is called the Shema. It is in Hebrew, something on my head, Shema Yisrael ad Hashem Elokeinu ad Hashem Echad. What it is saying is, in English, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. It is Judaism's most declarative statement of monotheism. Our God's the only God, and he's only one God. But that's not what the original translation is. First of all, you got to break it down. Shema means hear or listen. Israel, Hakim defined it as a different word, not the followers of El, as the followers of Judaism. He said Israel meant the slaves or the servants of El. El is another Semitic god. El, plural Elo, becomes Allah to Arabs in Islam.
Elohim. No.
Yes, be quiet. We're getting there. You're good. You jump ahead, which is great. Which means that your mind is working in good sense. So we're going to go there. You're going to know who Elohim is. Elo. Okay. So, what did it say? Shema. Listen, followers and servants of El, the commission god. Now, as it is written, it's written not as the tetragrammaton, which we know as the name of God, Yud, He, Vod, He. Written out, which is literally pronounced Yiyah, which is actually a word in Arabic, Yah. We call it in English Yahweh. Becomes in Christianity Jehovah.
Right.
But it is not written that way. It is written Yah, but it is pronounced as Adon. It's pronounced, and I'm blaspheming here because I'm not supposed to use the name of God in vain. It's pronounced Adonai in Hebrew. The Oi is just a alliterative ending for singing, for alliteration. So it's Adon. Well, as Ahmed, who could speak Hebrew and Arabic, accurately points out, the Commission T becomes the Hebrew D when it comes down to the language. So Adon is really Aten. It's really Akhenaten's God, if you will. That's there in the title. But it's not pronounced. They go then and use the aspect of Amen. He's to be hidden. You don't pronounce his name. It's not written out. So you pronounce it as Adonai, but it's written as Yahweh. So here it is now. So then we're going to go to the rest of it. Adonai Eloheinu, Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Saying Elo and Adonai are one. What did it say? Here's the translation. Hear, O followers of El, Aten and Amen, and Yahweh and Elo are all the same God. Elohim, him is just the ending. And isn't it interesting? Elo is a masculine singular noun, but with the Elohim ending, it becomes feminine plural.
Interesting.
So they're trying to say, here he is, both masculine and feminine together. So Elohim is just a plural. It is Elo. Elo becomes Allah. Yeah. So they're all there. They're all the same. So here's where I would interrupt the lecture, and I would say, what we're saying to you is that Yahweh, Jehovah, Amen, and Elo, and Allah are all the same guy. Now here's where I would have a visual.
A little bow after that.
Here's where I would have a visual aid, which I've lost. I did this in my lectures, but anyway, it's the Tetragrammaton written out. Yud, Hey, Vud, Hey. I can write it out to you and send it to you.
Yes, please do.
Hey, the Vud, Hey, and the Vav. That's Adonai. That's Elohim. We turned it upside down, and I show it to the Egyptians. And I showed, it was Hakim who saw it first, because I was showing him the picture one day of the name, and he turned it around, upside down. You know what it says upside down?
What?
Allah. Allah.
Interesting.
All Allah is Yahweh upside down.
Come on.
Now, there's a lot of Muslims in the audience, Arabic speakers, probably got very offended by that, but it is what it is.
Well, it's all one.
Because when you turn it upside down and show it to them, in their language, they can't deny it. It's saying Allah. So it's all the same guy.
Yeah, so anyway you look at it, we're all just looking at the same God.
Oh, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are all the religion of Amen. And what is the original of Amen? When Amen is original, there's no image. He's hidden. Well, what is the story of Judaism? There's to be no image of God. And this is what they tell the story in the Haggadah, the story that we read during Exodus every year, during Passover. When we do the ceremony, we're reading from the Haggadah. And the Haggadah says that the Jews were to be different because they were to make no images of their God, as the Egyptians had done. But originally, Amen had no image.
So basically what you're saying is the big misinterpretation of religious warfare is that we all have actually agreed that we believed in one God and it was misinterpreted along the way.
And we've been fighting these wars for centuries, 5,000 years. My God can beat up your God.
And that's ridiculous.
It's patriarchy. Because then what is Christianity now? Now let's move on. Let's just slide forward. Now comes Christianity. Okay? I used to lecture, and I'm going to go to one of my favorite comedians, that the biggest mistake the Christian fathers did was identifying Jesus as a Jew. And therefore having to say, we have to honor the Old Testament and put it in. If they had just come up with a New Testament, just by itself, there wouldn't be the problems that there is. Now, here's the problems. Here's the problems. And the problems are pointed out very succinctly for American comedian Louis Black, Jewish American comedian, who's one of my absolute, he followed up on Bill Maher and George Carlin, attacking religion like that. Okay. Here's an interesting story, Judaism. He would say, now they would say, every Sunday, he would say, I turn on the television and see a Christian preacher preaching from the book of my people, the Jewish people. And he would say, inevitably, they always get it wrong. Because we're taught as Jews not to take the book literally, but figuratively, symbolically.
Right.
But the Christian preachers take it literally. So he said, so here's the problem. How do you explain the New Testament compared to the Old Testament? So he'd say, because the Old Testament, God is more like the God of the Greeks and the Romans. He's jealous. He's vengeful. He's wrathful. You screw up with him, you're dead. You're for eternity. You're going to be doomed. You don't go to heaven. Blah, blah, blah. Judgment, judgment, judgment. Well, judgment comes from Kemet, and we'll back up and we'll go to that. But judgment, judgment, judgment. So he said, well, here comes the God of the New Testament. He's all loving, all forgiving, all great, all peaceful, all love. Well, what happened?
Yeah, exactly.
In between, did God take anger management classes?
Right. What happened?
Did having a son mellow him out?
I was always confused about that.
Uh-huh.
They're so different.
They're not the same God. They're not the same story. So why did you piece this together and you have to explain the Old Testament about that? It's not the same. So here's what Lewis Black would tell this story. Lewis Black, Moses, the most devoted disciple of God. God tells him to do this. Go through this pain and torture. He does it. God tells him to do that. Climb up on the mountain and dead bony bush. He does that. He does this. Everything God tells him, he does. But because these people built the golden calf, and what was the golden calf? We were going to return to that. Well, it's Hathor, the cow. They went back to worshiping what they knew in Kemet. They had to bring back the feminine because what Ramesses was bringing them was no feminine element. This is what is an element of Judaism. I'll tell you, because they had to bring it in. So they went and they made an image of Hathor and they're worshiping it. Oh no, it's terrible, and he destroys the original articles, the Ark of the Covenant, the Ten Commandments, and he has to get another one. So God blames Moses for that. Moses comes.
Now I know why you wear that T-shirt today.
They're coming to the promised land. And here's how Lewis Black says it. God comes along and says, guess what, Mo? You're not getting in. Ha, ha, ha. Kiss my ass. So then Lewis Black says, just the kind of guy you want to work for. You didn't get it.
I didn't get it.
You didn't laugh. This is God. Says to Moses, guess what, Mo? You're not getting in. You're not getting into private land. Kiss my ass. So Mo, that's just the kind of guy you want to work for. That's right. The Jewish God. Right. You know? Okay. Yeah, Moses doesn't get to go in.
Right.
Moses doesn't get to the promised land.
Yeah, after all that work.
Well, you know why? It's a different explanation in other books. That Ramisu brought the Hatan followers into Canaan. It was desert. They were promised a land of milk and honey, flowing with the fruits. He said, this is not it. He left them there and he kept going. And he wound up in India, in what's known today as Kashmir, Srinagar, Kashmir, which is a land of milk and honey, flowing with dates and fruits. And
I stayed on a houseboat in Kashmir.
And that's where some people say today Moses is actually buried. Because here's an interesting story. It says in the Old Testament that Moses says to Joshua, before he dies, he's 125 years old, make sure my bones are brought back to Kemet one day. That's buried. To the promise, to where they belong. Never happened. Never happened. Well, he went on to the promised land. He's buried in and actually, they also say Mother Mary. This is another offshoot. We can get into this another time. We can talk about Christian mythology. If the story is that Mary went on with Jesus' children, his two children, went on to India and was there. She's worshipped today. There is a saint called Mari, and she's buried in what is today Pakistan. There is a city called Mari, M-A-R-I, which some people believe Mother Mary is buried. Mary Magdalene, the mother of Jesus' children, went on to the south of France, which you know July 25th every year is the feast of Mary Magdalene in the south of France. And the city there is called Sainte Marie de la Mer, where she's supposedly buried in a cave. You know the story. You're nodding, you know the story.
Yeah, there's a good documentary on the guy who just...
All of that. There's a book people want to read called Jesus Lived in India by a Kashmiri scholar named Fida Hasnain. I'll send you the information. He did not believe the story that Jesus is buried in India, that he did not stay in the promised land. He went on. He was not crucified. He survived the crucifixion. There's a story of that when they rolled away the stone, he was not resurrected. He was actually there. Huh?
I believe that story.
That story is true. There's a lot of evidence to it. But he believed it. This man denied the story. There is in the town of Srinagar a tomb of a gentleman called Uz Asar. In that language, it means son of Joseph. There is some iconography showed on the tomb, shows feet nailed with crosses to the feet. But when it shows the hands, it shows the cross that's nails through the wrists, not through the hands. As we know, the Romans crucified. That was not a new thing. But it was supposed to be a painful death. You were going against the emperor of Rome, so you had to be tortured. You had to die a miserable death. It would take a person 3 days to die from crucifixion. Why? Because they didn't hammer through the hands. The hands couldn't hold the support of the body. The body would rip. They put it through the small bones of the wrist. And they built a little platform where the person would sit on. So the whole weight of the body is not being put on the nails. And you would bleed to death for 3 days. That's how you would die.
Wow.
So Jesus was taken down in 1 day.
Mm-hmm.
He couldn't possibly have died on the cross. So the story, the Rosicrucians tell the story. This is part of the Rosicrucian teachings. Jesus only lost consciousness on the cross, came down, went on and taught in India, lived to be over 120 years old, was known as Isa. He is a saint in Buddhism, known as Saint Isa. It's all in this book. Again, this is an offshoot to what we would normally talk about, but it's there. Moses didn't die, and Moses went on. Jesus went on. Mary went on. Okay. That's all of the tradition. So what is Islam? Islam is Muhammad coming along, another interesting person. Muhammad. Hakim said there was no one named Muhammad before Muhammad. It is a title. These things were all titles. The Christ, Misu, all of these, all the titles of the kings were titles. They were not common names. Nobody was named Amenhotep. It was a title. Hamid means grateful. Muhammad means the grateful. It's a title. So he comes along. He doesn't say he wants to create it. And Jesus never said he wanted to create a new religion. Again, Jesus said directly, I have come to fulfill the laws of Moses, not to deny them. He never taught about creating a new religion. He said, let's go back to the teaching of Akhenaten, to the way where God is the God of all, blah, blah, blah. And he never said, worship me as God. He said, the way is through me, means follow my path, follow my initiation. Again, there are 2 paths of initiation that was taught in ancient Kemet, the way of Osiris, wizard, which meant you had to reincarnate over and over, come back, and not reincarnate, but come back and clear your karma. Another was the way of Horus, which means you do it in 1 lifetime. Jesus was the first Horian. Jesus went on the path of doing it all in 1 lifetime, clearing your karma and becoming enlightened. He said, follow my path, my example. Don't worship me as God. So he wasn't trying to create a new religion. Muhammad's not trying to create a new religion.
But we're still going back to Kemet.
Muhammad came back and said that Jews and the Christians got it wrong. They're not teaching the true teachings. This is the true teachings. But Muhammad didn't write anything down. Moses didn't write anything down. They're called the 5 books of Moses, but he didn't write them. Jesus didn't write anything down. Paul, Peter, the disciples wrote it down. So, what does it mean? It means, again, Hakim said, if it had to be written down, it's not the whole truth. So there's the holy books that everybody's so hung up on. But here's a quick history of Islam, because people don't know. There, what taught in Islam is told there's the 4 caliphs of Islam, the 4 main from Muhammad. Then was one called Abu Bakr. Then is one called Usran or Uthran. Then is Omar and Ali. So the 4 come after Muhammad, starting with Abu Bakr, Osman, Uthman, Omar, and Ali. Okay, first one is Abu Bakr, which means baby camel in Arabic. He supposedly knows Muhammad. He meditates on Muhammad in the cave with him, when Muhammad is given the transmission directly from God, from Allah, directly. Muhammad is illiterate. He cannot read or write. So he transmits to Abu Bakr. Okay, Abu Bakr gets the teachings. He has his main disciple, after Muhammad has passed, who's known by 2 different names in English, Osman, or Uthman. He writes the Quran from the teachings he gets from Abu Bakr. And what is the first line of the Quran? There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the one true teacher. That becomes the Sunni form of Islam, the oldest form of Islam, the Sunni. However, then there's another teacher, Omar, who comes and spreads the word. And there's a fourth one, Ali. Ali is Muhammad's son-in-law, marries his daughter, Fatima. But he decides, I'm just as important as Muhammad. So he changes the first line of the Quran.
No.
There is no God but Allah, and Ali is the one true teacher. That becomes the Shia, the Shiite. So, hear me, Oriah, Oracle, hear me, everyone who's listening. The Shia and the Sunni have been killing each other for 800 years based on one word of the Quran, replacing Muhammad with Ali.
I can't handle this. It's so ridiculous. And it all comes back from Kemet. Everyone.
And what has happened in Christianity? Roman Catholicism gets corrupt, becomes corrupt. You get those who revolt against it. And the first Protestant was in what is today the Czech Republic, not Martin Luther. The first Protestant was a man named Jan Hus, who was a Catholic bishop in 1455. This is 1500s, but 100 years before Martin Luther.
Mm-hmm.
He says, why is the church keeping it all to themselves and not allowing the common people to receive the catechism? He starts preaching to the common people. They say, we were in the church. There's a church in Prague, in Praha, the church that he spoke. It's a little small church, but they say hundreds of people, if not 1,000 people, would cram, no seating, standing up to listen to Jan Hus preach. He was so venerated. He was so thought of. But the Catholic Church condemned him, and they hung him. And the people of the Czech Republic, who were called Moravia and Bohemia. It's where we get the word Bohemian. Moravia and Bohemia made up the ancient Czech Empire. They revolted against the church. They went into the church. They took the Catholic bishop and they threw him off the Charles Bridge into the river. They were the first Protestants. Then began the 100 Years' War. Luther comes 100 years later.
So at the end of the day, was the through line political motivation? Because if the storyline is all based from Kemet, then all of the misinterpretations has to be, we're not following the same God, but that has to have a political origin, I would think.
All of these so-called leaders, all of the ones that we call Moses, obviously, Jesus for sure, Muhammad, then later, even in the Sikh religion, are revolting against the religion of the day, that it's not the true religion of the past. But it's still patriarchal. Again, we're here, God the Father, right? Well, I said God the Father was not God the Father, it was God the Son. God the Son of the Great Mother takes her place. Yahweh, Allah, even Amen. Amen was just 1/5 of the understanding. The Great Mother ruled all. Here he is, 1/5. He takes over, and he becomes the state god. Amen is actually referred to in the New Kingdom as the King of the Netters. That's the first time we say God.
So you haven't even gotten to the tribes of like North Americas and the Mayans and like the Northern Hemisphere. I mean, they were worshiping the Mother Spirit, the Great Spirit, Mother Earth.
But they became patriarchal. The majority of the indigenous people, that's the same thing. I mean, look at Hindu religion, Vedantism, which is based on the ancient teachings. It's still Shiva. I mean, it's still the male gods dominate. And women, for a country that had a strong tradition of goddesses, of matriarchy, India today is some of the worst sexist society on our planet. Women are raped and treated badly in India, worse than any other country in the world. And yet they had such a strong goddess religion.
I know.
And the goddesses are still supposedly worshipped in India. But yet you'd rape a woman? Nah, you're not worshiping the goddess.
Yeah, they're definitely not worshiping the goddess.
Nah. So, okay.
So is the calf represent with Krishna, does that represent the Hathors?
What's that?
The calf, the cow with
Yes.
Krishna.
Yeah. Again, what the golden calf that they make in the desert, that's why it took 40 years, is Hathor, is the cow goddess.
So when you start seeing like Kali and all these like really extreme gods, is it all symbology? It's representation of
Again, they're taking an aspect and they're making it a deity. Kali is the destructor. I mean, that's the aspect of the Great Mother, which Sekhmet represents. Again, Sekhmet becomes later in dynastic Kemet itself, the new kingdom, the goddess of war.
I wish that you had like a giant wall and then like you can just
like Gina.
just like in our last video.
It's in the books. I mean, there's more visual in my books, of course.
No, but like it's like a map. It's like
it is. Well,
when
I do a presentation, I do a presentation. I'm doing it with all the images and showing this thing. It's hard just talking.
Who did the early Russian Empire believe in? What was their religion?
What is early Russian? What are you talking about? What age?
The Russian people from Russia.
They go back to a matriarchal people, but that's long gone. We all go back to a matriarchal people. It's long gone. She's only remnant there as the Virgin Mother. That's what's left. I mean, they make Mary a virgin, and that does not mean what the word virgin meant. To the ancient people, it just meant a woman who wasn't married, not that she'd not had sex.
Yeah, let me tell you, there's a lot of really confused Christian children trying to understand how to get pregnant without consummating.
Yeah. Well, that's Agnes of God, the famous play.
Because they just couldn't accept the reality.
That's a whole other, wow. We just went to another subject. I don't know if we want to go off of that. But Agnes of God. Do you ever hear the term parthenogenesis? Have you ever heard the word?
No.
Parthenogenesis. It means a female being able to conceive without a male. It exists in insects.
Yeah, insects do it.
It exists in some birds.
Mm-hmm.
We believe it exists in mammals. The ancient Cometians believed it existed in women.
So was Agnes a real person? Did that really happen?
No, that's a story that was made up. But there have been stories of supposed nuns who got pregnant. How could that happen if they weren't with a man? It can happen. There are cases. I have a book written by a man who had a female friend who supposedly did, although there's no photographs, there's no documentation. So there's no actual scientific documentation that a human female has given birth without a male. But the Cometians believed their female netters could. Some of the feminine female netters have no male consorts. A lot of them do. Isis has Osiris. Hathor has Horus, etc., etc. But some of the female netters have no consorts.
So is the
and yet they're shown having children. Exists.
So the Hathors, do they come from a solar system?
This is channeled by someone. We only know Hathor. Now, what are called Hathors? Maybe come from Venus. Extraterrestrial interdimensional life forms. That's possible, but that's not Cometian. That's not part of Cometian mythology.
Yeah.
That's modern mythology.
I mean, you really stick very close to the timeline of human history, which is important because we really, really want to know. We really want to be very accurate as to how this all started. Because the more I research, the more I just see miscommunication after miscommunication.
Absolutely.
That's what.
So it's obvious that we're going to have to go to another session.
Yeah, we will. We will definitely carry this on.
Because we still have half of this session. Because now we go, again, Akhenaten's connected to Judaism. We made that connection. Now we can connect to Rosicrucians. How the Rosicrucians believed Akhenaten. Because here's what led to me. Again, 1968, I find Freud's book connects to Judaism. Okay, I followed that through. But in 1980s, when I moved to San Jose, and I got involved with some friends that were Rosicrucians, and I went to Rosicrucian Park in San Jose, California, there are images of Akhenaten all over the park. I said, what is this? If you look at Google or Wikipedia, and you Google Rosicrucianism, you'll see it's a Western metaphysical secret society that began in the Middle Ages, period. So what is this? Showing Akhenaten. And now I talk to the Rosicrucians, and they would tell me, he's considered our traditional Grand Master. And I said, really? So I had to investigate that. So that'll be next time.
I
Then
cannot.
we'll get into sexuality, because I knew we could not do sexuality in this hour
I have so much.
by itself, because we're going to talk about, you have to talk about the practices that were probably during the shamanic times, then the
Yes.
practices that were pre-shamanic, and then the practices in ancient Kemet matriarchy before,
Yes.
and then to Judaism, Christianity, the
Yes. And I
sunrise.
want to see the progression of how it turned out that women turned into objects
Yes,
and
that
shame and all of that.
we can do that full bore.
Oh, that's great. Okay, well,
So this is why the Egyptologists are wrong. They
right.
say Akhenaten just existed for 17 years. He tried a revolution to go back to the old way. It failed, and he was lost to history. Well, he was attempted to be lost to history because the Comitian priests believed you uttered the name of the deceased to keep them alive. So this is why they hacked out his images. After
Right.
he fell, they go back. They put Tut on the throne. They changed his title to Tut Ankhemen. She changes to Ankas and Amen. Amen comes back in. Amen becomes the ruler again. After people leave they leave Kemet, they become the Exodus, they become the Israelites. Again, let me just complete that. The 40 days in the desert, they had to form a coalition with the followers of El, with the followers of Yahweh. And so they combine, they become the Israelites, the followers of El. 12 tribes. One tribe are the Levites. The Levites were the Aten priests. The Levites are supposed to be taken care of by all the other 11 tribes. They don't work for a living. They're the priests. They're the rabbis now. So they get taken care of and supported by. So the Levites become the ones who write down the Torah, and we'll go into more detail, the writing of the Torah, because we still have more to go.
Yeah, we definitely have to talk about that.
So the Jew is what we're going to come to. The Jew, actually we could finish this real quickly. Jew is only one of the 12 tribes, the tribe of Judah. There's 12 tribes, right? They come into the Canaan. They split into two kingdoms because they're two sons of Solomon arguing with each other. They fight over each other. So you get a northern kingdom of Israel, southern kingdom of Samaria. There's only two tribes left. The Assyrians come in. They disperse 10 of the 12 tribes. Then come in the Babylonians. There's only two tribes left, tribe of Benjamin, tribe of Judah. They take them to Babylonians, what's known as the Babylonian captivity. This is Jewish history, 586 BC. When they return in Babylon, they meet with the Babylonian priests. There they write the Torah. It comes back, the story is written halfway down. When they come back, then they write the story of the Torah. Then they become the Jews because there's only one tribe left. Romans take over. It's only the tribe of Judah, so they're called Jews. So Jews are only 1/12. Israelites were formed in the desert. The original people of the Hebrews were African people.
Wow.
This is why Jews and blacks have had such a closeness, because again, African slaves identified with supposedly Israelites being slaves, so they identified with them that way. They also really enjoyed the Old Testament, and that's why all the spirituals come from the Old Testament. All the prayers in black churches today are from the Old Testament. So, and who became the leaders of the civil rights? Most of the white people were American Jews, because they understood persecution. They understood, even though they became the slumlords too, there's a lot of anti-Semitism that exists among African Americans. A lot of it is justified because a lot of Jewish Americans became slumlords and exploited blacks as much as Christian white people did. But Jewish Americans were leaders in the civil rights movement because they identified Jew to Israel, to ancient Hebrew. We're going to continue.
I want somehow you to do like a little bow after, because it's so good. You give me chills when you talk because you make it come to life. You take something so ancient and bring so much life to it. I literally feel like it's happening right now. And it's so
it's again what you've already known, because we're all so much more alike than we're similar. All the differences.
That's the part I love.
And it's the religions who started it.
I also love how bold you are, that you don't care, that you're breaking through all of these. Like,
well, I'm also at the stage in the life that I don't give a flying F what do people think about what I say and do. I used to be real cognizant of criticism. I used to take it ego hurt. I don't care anymore. My job is to present. And as Hakim would say, we are not presenting a theory. We're not arguing. We're not debating this. He would say, somebody comes along and they say, oh, I like what you're teaching. I'd like to go further. Come, join us. Other people say, no, I want to argue. I want to differ. We'd say, have a nice day.
You know, I think Hakeem brought us together because don't you find it ironic that you have a shaman like talking to you?
He still sends people to me. People see the pyramid code and they want to know more. They see my name, they Google my name, they find me on Facebook, they become students.
Yeah.
He is still sending people to us. He will still continue. As I said on a post I just made, his teachings are forever. Eventually, Egyptology will be gone and it will be just chematology.
I believe that. I
Because
hope
Egyptology can be embraced.
Bigger.
Yeah, Egyptology can be embraced in chematology. Egyptology cannot embrace chematology because they cannot represent the matriarchy. They cannot understand that it was a theocracy, not a monarchy. The kings were just figurehead powers.
Everything they did.
But you're so
fall apart.
you're so astute when you stop me and say, "This is where the separation had." Oh, I can see. This is where the separation came. I'm in the age of separation. 2000 BC. We can go back 5,000 years. It really starts to come in around 3000 BCE, where all the civilizations start to worship male gods, start to become patriarchal. That's where the separation. And today, us and them, Trumpers and non-Trumpers, I mean Democrats, Republicans, everything is separated. Us and them, us and them. We can't even talk to each other anymore.
Right.
And we're all the same. And I close with a nice quote that I had in my second book, because you haven't read it. It's from Satya Sai Baba. It's people saying, oh, there's so many. Again, why we use the word spirit and not soul? Because Hakim was a Buddhist. He did not believe in individual soul. The Buddha taught we're not individuals. So this is what Sai Baba says. He uses the Sanskrit term Jivatma. He said, do you think that there are billions of Jivatmas? No. There's only one Jivatma. And we're all just reflections of the one. This is the Commission teachings. This is the Commission teachings.
So through your archaeological finds and digs, psychologically, emotionally, and physically, you have actually come to scientific conclusion that we are one. And your job is to make sure everybody hears it, which is really funny because that's what I do.
That's what we're going to talk about next time is a Rosicrucian. A Rosicrucian is supposed to be a walking question mark. Don't accept anything, experience it. Only know from experience. And Hakim said the only teachers we really had are the experiences we have in life. That is our truth. It doesn't go through the brain. It's why they discarded the brain.
Thank you, Hakim.
Okay, babe.
Thank you, Stephen. Have a good day. We'll see you next week.
Okay, we're going to continue next week with part 4, which will really be 3B.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Have a good one.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.